what the grid at California is doing. So the demand, what the renewable generation is, and they just added storage, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So it's actually really cool to see, you know, kind of almost in real time what the grid is doing. But this was about 2 days ago. This light blue plot is the demand on the grid in California. So this entire California grid. I think that this includes residential solar, just by the shape of it, and I don't think CalISO has like all the residential solar feeds anyway, so that's just what they see, their demand, they see this demand. This is net renewable generation, so in front of the meter, grid side renewables. It's wind, solar, biogas, geothermal. One thing to note, so okay, well, first of all, there's a big chunk missing here. That means a lot of energy is being supplied by clean sources, which is great. What's not so great is this ramp rate, right? So without renewables, there's not as much variability. Adding renewables introduces variability because the sun goes down and solar stops producing. And the grid really wasn't designed to handle that kind of volatility. So what this means is on this day, and this is not even the worst day of the year, we've got to turn about 10 gigawatts of power generation on in about 3 hours. That's like, I think, 10 million homes have to come on, like the load has to be supplied for 10 million homes, if I did my math right, in about 3 hours. And that's going to get worse. I'm sure everyone's seen the duck curve, but in 2020 it's going to go up to 13,000 megawatts in 3 hours on a spring day. So storage can help with this, but one thing to notice is that this ramp rate is pretty high around 5 or 6 in the evening, right? That's when the sun's going down, and you need to turn on this extra generation to satisfy demand. If you look at where the battery's starting to charge, that's also right around that time. So you're actually adding extra load onto the grid right when it doesn't need it. So it's not just software, not just having a lot of solar, it's not just having a lot of storage, but it's also policy, tariffs, and this holistic kind of view of how we can help the grid better that's needed. Because just having solar and storage can sometimes actually make the problem worse. One of the ways that storage can help stabilize and solve this problem is that we can actually take, we have hundreds of storage systems out in California and in other parts of the country and the world. What we can do is we can aggregate these storage systems and make it look like just one big power plant, and then we can offer it to the grid. But because we're behind the meter, you're now serving two masters in a sense. You have to do demand management for the customer, and then you have to do demand response, or what we call grid services, if called. One of the things that helps out is noticing that at any single time, not every single battery is active. It might be that building X is far away from its peak and the system is not active, while building Y is doing demand management, or the way that the tariffs are structured among different sites helps you out because the peak times are different. But this plot shows, I just took a random day. Actually, this was about a year ago for our, I got lazy and didn't update it for this talk. But it's not that different today. This is a function of time. This is 1 day. This is the state of charge of our fleet. The state of charge is just a percentage of like how full our systems are, right? 100% the systems are fully charged, 0, they're all depleted. You'll notice that on average, the average state of charge is at worst 90%, which means that 90% of the energy in our systems are just sitting there and not being utilized for demand management. There is some variation. This is the interquartile range is 25%, and so I haven't shown the outliers. Some of the systems are completely empty. But there's 90% of the energy in our fleet that's just sitting there that we could go to a utility and say, hey, you got some volatility on the grid. We can help with that. We can make it look like what we call our VPP is an aggregation or a virtual power plant or aggregation of systems. This looks like a power plant to you. It's a little different because it's not a traditional power plant because a traditional power plant, as long as you give it fuel, will just keep producing power. Batteries are a finite resource, so you have to, there's some subtleties there, but it does look like a power plant. All right, so I'll just gloss over this again, but I think I said this already, but now they're competing demands, right? If you have to do demand management for a particular customer, you might not have enough capacity to then discharge when the utility calls you to do that. And one of the ways you can minimize that is, well, just knowing that, there's, on average, there's some extra capacity. You could just overbuild your batteries, or you could use intelligent software to manage this process, right? So combining algorithms and the things that David talked about. So one of the problems is, like, how do you choose times and amounts to charge or discharge the resources? And before I get to the kind of our solution, I just want to say this is something that we're actually doing now. In the last couple of months, so we have a contract with Southern California Edison for providing 85 megawatts of power for up to 4 hours. It's a capacity resource, which means they kind of use it. They give us a monthly payment for the for like being able to call us, within some parameters, within some times a day, some number of times a year, and we would have to discharge up to that much power. We've provided almost, I think, over 20 grid service events in the last couple of months. We don't have 85 megawatts in the ground. That's, I think, in 2021. But I'll show a little bit more details later. We're also in the wholesale market through what's called the DRAM program in California. It's a demand response auction mechanism, so where we place bids into the wholesale market. And we say, at this time, for this price, you can call us, we'll discharge our batteries. And we've executed over 700 events in the last 2 years, and many of them are real-time events, which means they call us and say, the next 5 minutes you will have to discharge a certain amount. And we have other programs as well with other utilities, Con Ed, Hawaiian Electric, which is really interesting, and Austin Energy. So how we do this is a mixture of forecasting, to have accurate forecasting. It's really useful to know what's going to happen. Optimization, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, it's a way to come up with that flat line, right? Like, how low can you hold the building load? And we have also real-time algorithms and controls running on the power monitor that's next to our energy storage devices. And then you do this over and over again at some cadence. So that you're constantly responding to any events that are happening at your buildings, any grid level events, etc. It's kind of hard to understand how important forecasting is with battery storage, and there are actually a lot of interesting academic papers that have kind of looked into how accurate your forecasting algorithms have to be. And it's an interesting problem because demand management is, by definition, kind of a long-term forecast problem, because you're judged on a peak period within 30 days, so you need to know what your building is going to do over 30 days to kind of understand how much money you can save the customer. But demand response applications typically require more accurate short-term forecasts, so within the next 6 hours or a day, because you're usually being called by utility in a time of need, and that's usually in the short term. So it's kind of interesting what kind of algorithms, so you kind of have to develop different algorithms for demand management and demand response. So we use a family of these algorithms, and we kind of have, we train them per site, we train them often, and we run this forecast optimization loop frequently. I just want to quickly talk about how important forecast accuracy is. So this is actually real data from a single site. It's like a small industrial site in, I think, Central California somewhere, where the load is fairly variable. It's hard to forecast because we don't have much insight into what's happening inside the building. This black line is the actual load for one day, and you pretend that this was their peak day for that billing period, and you have these system parameters. We have an 18 kilowatt system that stores up to a maximum of 30 kilowatt hours in the battery. If you knew with perfect information what was going to happen on this peak day, you would calculate that the system, and again, ignoring time of use pricing and complications of tariffs and stuff, and just doing demand charge management, you would say that you could, to the utility, you could hold this, the building load below this line. So if the load at the building went above, you would discharge. If it went below, you would charge or do nothing. And this is what the state of charge would be of the battery. Basically, it would be full most of the time for very short periods of time. You'd do some discharge, the state of charge would go down, charge back up again. The cool thing about this particular site is that you don't have to do much to keep to hold this line. For every kilowatt of peak demand reduced, you only need half a kilowatt hour of energy. This red line is the forecasting algorithm that we first developed a long time ago when we only had like 3 customers. So we had like tuned this forecasting algorithm and the parameters were for these 3 customers. It didn't generalize well, clearly, because when we ran it on this site, it just didn't do well. If this was what you thought was going to happen the next day, the red line, this red dotted line, is the load you would try to hold, right? So above this line, you would discharge, and you would quickly run out of energy. Now we have these real-time algorithms that are running on the power monitor. So within the forecast intervals, they detect any changes, basically any difference between the actual load and your forecast, and they'll adjust accordingly. So because of those algorithms, you could still get 18. So when we simulate with this red set point, we'll call the set point, on the black load, you would still get a full 18 kilowatt reduction. So you'd still save the customer money. But for every kilowatt reduced, you would have to use 2.39 kilowatt hours of energy to do that reduction. This is our version 2 of the forecast. It's gotten a lot better. It's still not not ideal. And again, this is a hard to forecast site. So, but with this algorithm, you would use 1.7 kilowatt hours per kilowatt used. And then this is a green algorithm. We've got a little bit better. Still not great. We're still working on this one. But you would use 1.36 kilowatt hours per kilowatt. The point of this is that if you have a better forecast, you don't need to use as much energy to do demand management, right? And that is good because A, batteries are expensive, and batteries can and do wear out, right? Your 6-year-old laptop doesn't hold as much charge as it did when it was new. So you don't want to really use the battery if you don't have to. But what it really means is that by being efficient, by having smart algorithms, you have a lot more energy available for other revenue streams. So if PG&E called and said, we're having a problem with the grid, a generator died or whatever, we need you to discharge some energy, and you were using this old forecast, this system would not be able to contribute if this is when the event happened. Now that you have a forecast, you can then put it into what's called an optimization framework. And basically, mathematical optimization, there are a lot of algorithms that fall under this umbrella. But it basically allows for a selection of an optimal outcome given a large number of alternatives. So in the toy example that I showed you, there was only one demand charge for the whole day. And so it's very easy. You can just brute force, do a lot of simulations and figure out where that line should be. But in reality, there are a lot of utilities usually set different prices at different times of day. And so there are so the combinatorics gets pretty complicated. Instead of kind of doing this brute force approach, you could use one of these optimization frameworks. So what they basically allow you to do is set a target or a cost function. So you want to minimize some function, and usually for us, it's minimize the cost to the customer. However you want to define that, and it's subject to some constraints, right? The battery can only discharge so much energy, it can only discharge a certain rate, and you can't discharge at these times in California. You can't discharge out to the grid, so that could be another constraint, et cetera, et cetera. And then this is an example of actually one of our systems that just does demand management, but also is responding to a pretty interesting tariff called CPP, critical peak pricing. So at certain times when there's stress on the grid, the utility will call a CPP event. So it's not really a grid service in the sense that there's an aggregation, but if you're on the CPP tariff, suddenly you might find that your energy price is a lot higher because it's a very hot day in a certain place. And so previously you couldn't really do a whole lot about it. You'd kind of get this email and you have to turn a bunch of stuff off. But the system got notified that this was going to be a CPP event. In fact, there were 3 CPP events in a row on this in this week. It was doing demand management. It decided that actually the CPP event was more remunerative to the customer. And so it actually raised that set point a little bit, and then we were able to come up with a better saving for the customer on their bill. This is another example of optimization in at play. So there's a lot of things going on here, but this is our LCR VPP. So LCR is the demand response program that we're participating in Southern California. And each of these lines, probably hard to see, I apologize, is the state of charge of one of the systems that are participating in that virtual power plant. So this is when the event was called. A lot of our systems were doing demand management, and some of our systems actually were not communicating. And so the system kind of figured out how much energy to allocate for each. Our cloud-based system figured out how much energy to allocate for each system, depending on whether it was doing demand management. You can see this, that not all the lines. Some of these systems were not doing demand management, so they all just contributed evenly. Some of them started to do demand management, and then so other systems had to compensate. So this is like this forecast optimization loop that we're constantly running and adjusting in order to maximize the revenue for the customer. So I just want to end with saying that storage has gone. It's pretty exciting because storage is becoming pretty much a mature technology, and it's rapidly growing. I'm sure if you listen to Green Tech Media or something, they have projections of rapid growth for storage, front of the meter, behind the meter, residential, and there's a lot of potential for stabilizing the grid. And it's we're actively doing that, and I'm sure customer-sided or behind the meter storage can provide a lot of value to the largest number of stakeholders. And what's exciting is that storage not only works really well with renewables, but actually allows for increased renewable penetration by reducing volatility on the grid. But there's a couple of things to remember, and that's that storage isn't clean by itself. It's like electric cars, right? If you were charging electric cars from coal, you might as well just drive a regular car. So storage is only as clean as the energy being stored. And policy really matters, and tariffs matter, and so you need this kind of holistic view. It's not just software, it's not just the storage or the solar, but definitely intelligent software and algorithms to manage storage matters a lot. And STEM is actually participating in this kind of great storage revolution. Pretty exciting.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming and rolling up to the third of these 3 talks. All of our companies have been around quite a bit. I like to say that tomorrow is going to be Geli's 8-year birthday. Right? We planned for this. We also plan to get this world to 100% renewable energy with everyone's help by June 23rd, 2034. Who believes we can do it? Yes. A lot more than 8 years ago. Okay. So, and as part of that too, we took a very different approach than my compatriots here. We decided to go for a platform approach as opposed to a vertically integrated approach, and that is not always the smartest thing to do at the beginning of an industry. You got to build the systems and get them in. But we did this platform approach such that we can help a lot of different developers as the world evolves and the technology matures, as the financing structures mature. So I think we're actually kind of coming into that time now. So we will further tell you why 1 + 1 = 3 or 1 + 1 can = 6. And we're really here to tell all solar developers, utilities, retailers on how to do exactly that. So what is Geli? Geli, we're the industry's only design to automation to management platform. And what that means is we have online tools called Geli ESIS that you can go on like right now, and in 5 or 10 minutes you can size up a solar storage system with full financials. Pretty cool. I think Andrew Carlos, what do you say? We have a gigawatt of Angenia. We have got a couple Gelians back there. There's about a gigawatt of energy systems that have been input into Geli ESIS so far. Very interesting. Then we also have an expansive suite of energy applications. We use the same software for residential, commercial, and utility scale applications. I'm also very happy to say that after many years, we got our first patent issued, and it's all about an adaptive energy storage operating system. So kind of have an operating system structure for multiple economic services. That's the whole value stacking that we're talking about. So all that brains that goes into it. Not just the brains, but it's the structure of that brains that really Geli's pushed forward. That way, we can build like printer drivers, just like we build, well, drivers for power converters, just like we would build drivers for printers, say, for example. But then again, as you say, maybe there's like 23 applications for energy storage. RMI says there's 13. There might be an infinite number of energy-specific applications as we move on. And so we built a platform to really enable anyone to build applications for that. And then what's also key is our virtual power plant software. We deployed a network in New Zealand later last year. We have a little network coming up in Texas also. So it's both commercial, residential, and virtual power plant. That's kind of what we'll talk about today. Oh, who loves this pie? Who loves it? Okay. But I mean, the key is that there's a lot behind the meter, utility services, and ISO. You know, it's like not that many utilities are actually prepared to actually use these behind the meter assets to balance their local grid, right? That is, you know, congratulations on helping those utilities get there first. You know, it's like, but really we see behind the meter value and market value are the first two key drivers. You have to do at least a couple of them to actually make these systems pencil. We're just going to talk about commercial industrial today. And when we say commercial, it's not just commercial in size, but it's the commercially viable application. You know, we're finally to the point where solar and storage together are in like the 20 to 30% IRRs, which means you can split that in half and share it with the developer and share it with the host. So that's really great. And then, while we're talking about two applications, they're going to be behind the meter. We're going to talk about demand charge management and solar self-consumption, right? And these are two applications very important because it's hard to go ahead and forecast the load of the building. It's also hard to forecast the solar of the building. If that solar doesn't show up, what happened to our little spiff of dropping down, right, on the demand? So we'll address that here in a moment. Okay, who knows the difference? Who doesn't know the difference between energy and power? I didn't. I was a postdoc at MIT. I didn't know. Because we grew up in a power world. We never really had energy until our cell phones and laptops, right? But I also like to kind of think about it like energy is the area under the curve. Energy is the amount of data. But then the demand is the size of the pipe. It's how much bandwidth you have, right? And so it turns out every single utility across the world, every ones that we've looked at, it's about half for the energy charge and half for the demand charge. Why? Because they buy energy from someone and they deliver it. That's their business, is to deliver it. And so what happens if you have 100% solar coverage for 100% of your energy on your utility bill? What happens to your utility bill? Commercial only goes down by half. Well, right? Because it's half the bill. What if I have a big enough battery to cover 100% of my demand? How much does my bill go down? Half. Right. What's cool now is that those are the only really two dials that utilities can move. As solar was coming in, what did they do? Increase demand charges, make that solar energy worth less. Now that we have energy storage, like Insight and in financials, we got them both covered, right? So there's really, pretty soon it's gonna be really hard for the utility to move any direction and moving with rates that we can't compensate and actually deliver a better service with solar and storage. Here's a nice little system that we have down in Los Angeles at a logistics center. And as was described earlier, you have the normal load here, but then the solar comes in. But then the battery is going to go ahead and take down that little peak, right? You need a lot of intelligence to do that. I tell the team, I'm like, once you guys hit 95% demand charge management of optimal, we're getting out of the energy business and we're going to the stock market, right? Because these are peaks and valleys, and predicting those is really, really hard. It's also really hard to predict the solar. So this is like a lot of really hard problems together. And then what happens when clouds come over, right? That demand goes up, right? So you don't always get that, that reduction from that solar. So it's just not an easy problem. How do we solve that problem? Well, we do it with brute force. And so we take 15-minute interval data, we create a heat map of called a facility fingerprint. So each one of these lines is a day. You've got midnight to noon to midnight. Obviously, if they're doing something in the summer that's a lot more active, you can often see Christmas. People take it off. An example is for a system in New Mexico, and I'll have to say that these numbers are actually 2 years old. It really kind of shows how much batteries have decreased in price since then. But this was still a system that was penciling, right? So this is a New Mexico hospital, and they had about 50-50 energy charge to demand charge. Oh, surprise! Another utility with 50% energy charge to demand charge. Okay. Well, what's also interesting is that the energy charge is really low, 4 cents. But the demand charge is pretty high, it's $22. Right? We actually know now that anywhere in the world that has 14-cent kilowatt demand, $14 per kilowatt per month, and 14 cent per kilowatt hour, that works. That works. Go search for those rate structures. Right? Okay, so what are we going to do with this system? Well, we could just add solar, and that would be at a turnkey cost of like $2.50, add a 500 kilowatt solar array. We can reduce the demand with a battery. I don't know what you think battery systems cost these days, but I'll tell you, installation is more expensive than you think. That's part of where the industry's at right now. But then demand and energy, we'll see where we go here. We're going to take our baseline load, we're going to add that 500 kilowatt solar, and we can get a net load. And you'll notice, though, the solar doesn't knock out all the red peaks like we should. We still need a battery. And so if we're doing solar alone, right, we go ahead and cover some energy costs. But as you saw, there was those spikes. Those are still there. So we're getting maybe a little bit of PV reduction. You talk to any solar financier, ask them what percentage of the demand reduction they would attribute for solar. 10%. Max. It's actually a really good buffer for them. If they get more, it helps them on their kilowatt hour PPA price cover. Okay, so now if you add energy storage, okay, we're no solar, just energy storage. We're going to go ahead and reduce our demand. Okay, great. We're going to reduce that demand. We've seen that a couple times here today. Now we're going to do them both. We're going to have our baseline. We're going to have the PV in there, but we're also going to use the battery to go ahead and keep that load down from the PV. We're going to guarantee that PV reduction, and we're going to get some additional energy storage reduction too. So some economics for us. So we had a baseline bill, right, of $522,000, about half and half. The storage only, right, was going ahead and reducing it a bit, right? PV only, a bit. But now solar and storage together, right? That was pretty cool, pretty cool. So now this graph we're going to spend a couple of moments on. Again, these are 2-year-old data. I mean, things have significantly changed still, so it's only getting better, which is important because we got to split the revenues often for our partners. So here we have the solar, $39,000 a year with an NPV of 318. Right? And then, okay, maybe we'll see the storage of $27,000 a year and NPV of 108. Well, I say put them together. Now it's $105,000. Right? So the number I want to kind of move here are 1 + 1 = 6. It's an NPV of $600,000. There. Because I combined them. So this is the real power of solar plus storage. It's able to go ahead and keep that fluctuation down of the solar. Well, you're kind of hoping you get that demand reduction. And also at other times you go ahead and reduce that too. And so just kind of wrap this up and actually kind of promote a couple things. We have a lot more detail on our website. It's a 1+1=3 webinar that goes more into detail on how we do those calculations and run through our Geli eSys online design program. Dr. Zach Ernst, who's the director of our analytics, is giving a presentation when?
Next week, next Thursday.
Next Thursday?
If you're a competitor, you can't sign up. Everybody else can sign up.
Everyone's welcome, because we have to actually all kind of agree on what is optimal savings and how demand charge savings. There's a big lack of rhetoric understanding for how solar developers can sell demand charge savings. Right? We all have to be knowledgeable on this. Dr. Zach Ernst is going to go through like what's optimal. Like if I have a 100 kilowatt power converter, how much demand charge management am I going to get every month? I have no idea, because the load profile is different. Fundamentally, right? It differs each month. Well, what we might say, Geli eSys, we cover 10,000 tariffs accurately and comprehensively. So we're actually able to take those algorithms that we call energy apps and use them in different utilities. And of course we have our kind of energy driver framework also. So that allows us to have, I think we have like 9 different system integrator partners, over 100 different system combinations, right? And directly order an energy storage system online? Are you kidding me? Andrew, can we do that? Yes, yes. That's cool. I mean, now it used to take us days and weeks to do a single analysis. Now you can get through analysis in 5 to 10 minutes and have a very accurate answer. Then you can order it. We're getting to platform people. So that's about the end of my talk, and happy to answer more questions.
So do all three of you want to come up and then do the director's chair?
I'm not exactly sure how to frame this, but I'm going to try anyway. The law of physics versus the law of contracts. Have you guys changed the math on that? And what I mean is, if you're working through the Intertribal Council on Utility Policy, which I was, trying to sell wind power in the Dakotas, solar panel in the South, solar power in the Southwest, they tell you contractually, whoever you sell it to in California owns that electricity. But the law of physics is wherever the nearest draw is who draws power from it, and yet they charge you wheeling rates. Does anybody know about wheeling rates?
Yeah, I think
so is this going to change that equation?
I mean, that's a really valid point. A lot of what we're talking about here today is that behind the meter capability. And then what we all three touched on was how we can aggregate a bunch of behind the meters to participate into that market and effectively wheel. Really, wheeling only happens in between utilities out in the market space, right? So I think, David, you were talking a little bit about the South Australia. You're definitely wheeling, right?
I'm not overly familiar with the operations of that sector now.
That was more of a market play. And so yeah, I mean, energy storage is going to have solutions behind the meter for local grid management and market operations. All three. You got to hit the trifecta.
Excellent. Thank you.
This isn't really a question, but you guys didn't touch on resilience that energy storage creates. I think that's a huge value that's not really a cash value. But if you look at things that are going on in the world, it's a real value of the system.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can't disagree with that. Like you pointed out, though, it's oftentimes hard to plan for that revenue stream or consider it even a revenue stream. But no doubt it's a value in the back of most customers' minds.
$20 per kilowatt per year. That's what a normal backup generator contract costs. But that doesn't include the manpower when an event actually happens. You gotta get people out there, and the fuel cost is really expensive during those times, right? So $20 per kilowatt per year, because the UPS and generator industries kind of got that. But the cool thing is like once you have solar and storage, not that far away from being a hybrid UPS, new generator. So I think we should expect to see UPS manufacturers and generator manufacturers also enter the space. What's also really interesting, there is a decent amount of work going on to actually value resiliency, must be on a site-by-site basis. And the state of Massachusetts is working on it right now, and so that'll be actually really interesting if buildings would actually define what their time value of resiliency is. So,
in some sense, the grid services is resiliency itself, right? I mean, especially we have a project in Hiko's Hawaiian Electric, which I think sort of bring in dirty energy in this metaphor, but it's like kind of the canary in the coal mine for renewable penetration. It's a perfect storm. It's an older grid. There's tons of solar because until fairly recently, Hawaii got a lot of its energy from oil because they had to ship energy source in, and which meant that energy is very expensive. You're at the whim of the oil market. So as soon as solar prices dropped, everyone put solar on their roofs. But when you have a grid that's not designed for people to push energy back into it, that causes voltage fluctuations and a lack of stability, which means less resilient. And so storage can help there.
Can you describe how customer acquisition works for the behind-the-meter systems? So how does someone who has a storage asset on their site find you? Are they looking for through their utility? What's the go-to-market channel for you guys?
Geli Assist, online design tool, super easy. 1,400 developers already on there right now.
But is that customer going to that site directly, or is there some
No,
type of
what's really
marketing?
cool, so one of the approaches, I think a lot of us actually use it, which is the solar industry has been around for 15, 20 years. A lot of them know, they kind of cherry picked where a lot of the solar could go, but they also know where a lot of places that solar hasn't worked, either because of tariff structure or things were too expensive. And so really they're kind of like our army, right, to go ahead and we need to educate them on how to sell not just solar, but solar and storage. So, if there's a pain, someone should, your solar developer will find you, I'm sure.
So I'm hearing from the sort of hardware standpoint, I feel like I'm hearing two competing narratives. One is that, storage is getting cheaper and cheaper, like these systems will become more and more cost effective to produce. But on the other side, there seems to be a lot of worry about, is the manufacturing capacity going to be there? Is there enough lithium that's being mined right now in order to provide batteries for all the electric cars, all the electric devices, all the grid service battery projects? So I was wondering how those sorts of concerns play into your all's vision for batteries on the grid.
I can't speak too intimately about the battery production side of Tesla, mostly just because I don't know that much about it. But my perception, my understanding from inside the company is that while those are concerns of availability of lithium and the overall supply chain, definitely there are concerns. Tesla has decided to build a gigafactory because we're concerned that we wouldn't have the battery capacity through vendors in the market otherwise. But in terms of the raw resources, I've gotten the impression that we're not concerned for the next decade or two, or it's a longer time frame from what I've.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. And some people say we haven't even started looking for the lithium yet. So a majority of the lithium is used in ceramics processing. Right east in Nevada, there's tons of lithium. Simple Materials uses an electrochemical process to pull it off of the salt flats. There's plenty out there. So there's plenty out there now. At the same time, I think I remember you guys, Tesla had to actually buy batteries from Samsung just to fill South Australia. And electric vehicles are going nuts right now too. So there may be a constraint on batteries, but what happened when there was constraint on solar panels? A lot of people built solar panel plants. China built solar panel plants, right? This is a really great storm to be in. So I don't think we're in that.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question. First of all, I think all of you guys are excellent speakers, and I think I've learned a lot tonight. But a couple of things have come to mind. One is there seems to be a lot of the similar stories. Somebody brought up the solar in Hawaii. Well, yes, they put a lot of Hawaiians solar on the roofs, but they couldn't connect it to the power for at least 2 or 3 years because the power company didn't want to have this up, down, because they couldn't handle it. Now, I'm sure the people that are selling the solar, systems weren't telling people that. They were just selling the systems, and then they talk to the PG&E guys that go into Hawaii and say, oh, I want to turn my system on, and they say, no, can't do that. But there's other aspects. You talked about the resiliency. We're seeing examples of that. My favorite one is Puerto Rico. How would a resiliency be built into a Puerto Rican power grid that could be applied to other areas in the country and the world that have these massive storms that go through on a fairly regular basis, and they wouldn't have to rebuild their whole power supply system because they haven't even considered, gee, we should think of a different way of doing it.
Yeah. 3 years ago, we designed a microgrid, networks of microgrids for the Vieques and Culebra Islands off the East Coast. It was a DOE project, didn't get funded. But as soon as Puerto Rico happened, I actually shifted that report over to some of the Tesla guys. Right. So I think microgrid networks is important. And back in the day when wind power was first coming up in Japan, the Japanese grid insisted that all wind had battery on it. That's where the sodium sulfur battery technology came from. But that was just like too expensive. And I do agree. I mean, it's kind of like, it's just really wrong to put solar on wild type. Because basically it causes the utility to have to actually put more peaker plants on. But guess what? That's their job.
I have
so that's good. More work for them. That's what they want.
I guess my question's primarily for Puneeth. I'm just curious about when you have battery systems that you've installed, and ostensibly they are servicing not only the people, the companies that you've installed them, but then you're also using them for demand response. What happens? How do you handle situations where you think that their load is you've reached their load, you've shaved their peak down to where you want it to be, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to use this, I'm going to buy into the market. You discharge, and then boom, the company randomly doubles its capacity. How does that work in terms of contractually? Are you on the hook? Do the companies get a slice of what you're getting from the demand response market? I'm just very curious about how you handle that. The sort of conflicting interests.
Good question. I'm not on the business side, so I don't know all the details, but it's a combination of things. So we do split savings with our customers. I think there are multiple vehicles in how we, for demand management, structure those contracts. For demand response, it's also a little bit different depending on whether it's a capacity payment. We might share some of those savings. If it's an auction mechanism, I don't quite know what we do with the auction mechanism, because it's not a check every month for that. Sorry, I'm not quite on the business side, so I don't really know the details about it.
Hi. I'm curious, what's going on in the marketplace to address or enhance the forecasting for building consumption? Have you guys worked on that at all so you can have better forecasting?
So in the marketplace, do you mean the third-party forecast?
Yeah, like improved metering within buildings. Have you worked with any vendors that do that?
We haven't yet. We've really talked about it. But yeah, short answer no. It's like something.
But it's something you'd consider.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk after this.
we have a full API and we love forecasting. So any type of forecasting that can come in would be great.
Hi, Chris with Blue Planet Energy. So, I appreciate all the software and algorithms you guys have brought to the market, but if we kind of take a step up, you're playing the game that the utilities have defined, and you're trying to beat them at it. But the challenge is they can change the rules at any time. So, and Ryan, you mentioned a little bit, they got two knobs they can dial here. we're kind of dialing it in on how we can sort of address those. But I mean, to what extent are we actually protecting? I mean, our approach has been to basically like, whatever, we don't want to play the utilities game. We're going to serve those who want to be grid independent or off grid. But to what extent are you actually seeing that you have sustainable advantages in these markets with these softwares? I mean, you can change the algorithms, but if they change the rules all the time, they're just basically trying to protect their own profits and interests. So how are you guys protecting yourselves in that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It is a difficult game. It's always a bit of a dance, in terms of keeping up with the tariffs that a new utility or a utility brings into place. I guess, I think to some extent we've understood that we have to play their game if we want to be able to participate in the market and sell grid services, because we need those wires. Like you say, we can definitely chop a customer off from the grid and have some more options there, but to really be able to take advantage of the full revenue stacking opportunities, we typically do need to still have that grid connection. And so I think from my perspective, we've just decided, we have to keep outsmarting them. It is a cat and mouse game, but we're willing to keep playing it.
And to add to that, I think that's where I think policy is really important. Right? The utilities, if they do change, I think we as a society, as a government, whatever, have to realize that renewables are a good thing. And if utilities do want to change this, the right incentives have to be there. It doesn't have to be direct subsidies necessarily, right? I think storage has gotten beyond that and proven that we don't really need subsidies to be viable. But that's really where good policy comes in. And then, to your point, you raised microgrids, community aggregation. So there's so much, there's a lot of place for changing that interaction with your energy provider. That I think there's still going to be a great role for storage.
We're kind of change agents here, right? So, if we show this is successful, what are the utilities doing? They're deploying lots of solar. That's good. That's good. That's what we want. It's going to be a hybrid system. We spent the past 150 years, or 100 years, 120 years, interconnecting all the homes with all the wires, and let's use those still. And the thing is, our prices are going to keep on dropping. Solar battery prices are going to keep on dropping. And you can imagine, even if the utilities were going to put a coal plant on your house, that coal plant would be half as expensive as the coal plant that's far away. Why? Because you didn't need the distribution there. So fundamentally, if you can get to the customer, provide a better customer experience, deliver the energy right from the top of the house, you're in there. Now, if you can get the utility to also play that same game and enable this whole wonderful Internet of Energy to emerge, that's great. The only thing that they can really do is do fixed charges. It's only going to last for so long. Public advocacy groups won't call for it. You get what you pay for.
I think this question is maybe for Ryan, but anyone who wants to respond. In remembering, it's been about a year and a half or something since I read the RMI report. It sounds like you guys are getting a lot of experience in understanding how to tap multiple value streams at the same time from the batteries. But as I recall it, the regulatory challenge seemed like the biggest, and I'm curious in states like Hawaii, California, New York that are starting to provide DRAMs and some of these other things. I'm curious, are you at a point where you can only tap half the value of battery, or is it 25%? And how far do you think we are away from realistic regulatory evolution timeframes to get to the point where you can extract most of the value that's physically capable of being tapped?
Yeah, well, I'll answer it first, and I'll send it to my partners here. Being able to do the hard math of how to solve multiple problems, multiple constraints, we can do that behind the meter, right? So we do demand charge management, solar self-consumption. Solving two problems like that is the same as doing demand charge management and then demand response, okay? So I think we all have the math to do that. Now your question is, can we open all three areas? And to me, this is why we went to New Zealand and Australia. New Zealand and Australia is about 10 years more deregulated than the United States. So if you want to see what sexy electricity sales looks like, go to New Zealand and Australia. It's really cool. Because those retailers have the ability to sell energy to the customer at market prices. Those retailers can go ahead and participate in the market. Now it's also those utilities which are the first ones who are looking at putting in low voltage and medium voltage SCADA such that those systems can be used, right? We've also seen PQMD, right? So it's the non-wires alternatives inside distribution systems to go ahead and allow that for a local congestion capacity relief. So we're seeing it in spots. What's really important that you cover behind the meter, that you can get to the market, and if you can provide a service to the utility to support the local grid. We don't know, I mean, maybe the BQDM project is one of those areas, but that's really when the utility comes on, right? So really we feel that most places are open for behind the meter and market, how we get the utility. But utilities are starting the utility of the future divisions, they're thinking about this, they recognize that this is a big part of their new business, right? So it's happening. We'll see how fast it is. So actually the real thing is like as we go to Japan, I think we're all going to Japan, right? They're just opening their market. Yeah. Got it. We are. We're on our industrial advisory board for RVB Nodes project. But yeah, that market's just opening. So the real proof of the pudding is, can we take 30 years of learning what happened in Australia and New Zealand and take that and immediately drop it into Japan? If you do that, then that's great. That's acceleration.
Have you guys partnered with anybody to come in for like HVAC or lighting to see if you can further reduce the demand? What are the financials look like? Do you know what like the payback period or the?
We're doing a project at the Las Positas Community College, and we're integrating with the train chillers, and there's like CalMax thermal storage there. Hasn't been optimized since they put it in, right? And so all of a sudden that took a 5.5-year payback system down to 2.5 years. It's amazing. It's almost free because it's already there. If you can connect into it and control it, that's great. So that's why we don't build an energy storage operating system. We build an energy operating system.
Were they able to use something to reduce the front costs? Like, does that work into some of the programs like in California to reduce?
Yeah, if you can control the load profile via the utility bill, then you can do that.
Yeah, if I can add, I think we've certainly got some partnerships with load control companies. With C3 Power, for example, and we are. I think it's for us. It's like, let's see where we can play together and how this all works. And certainly, it's a great they both storage and load control play very well together, especially because storage is a finite resource. Right? There was a question about what happens when you didn't expect the building to do something and they turn this on. Well, load control is fantastic for that.
I don't think I necessarily have anything to add. I don't think that Tesla is doing too much in the building management side. Definitely investigating home energy management in general, but not too much on the building side. It's a large factor in it.
One of the things that we are seeing is like as people want to put in EV chargers, and now there's these things that are coming out called mega chargers. They can be all the way up to a megawatt of power. All of a sudden that's really blowing out demand and energy. And so solar storage at separate stations is almost becoming a necessary thing for facilities that want to put in a lot of EV chargers. So then that becomes critical into the whole load share.
Can I ask a second one real quick here? The situation in South Australia right now where they have like just a few large players and they don't use hedge contracts, and when the demand charges like are pretty insane, are there any parts of the country you think we might be in danger of having those kind of situations? Have you thought about that at all?
Parts of the U.S.
Yeah.
South Australia is really unique in how volatile it is and how frequently volatile it is. Texas is not like that. California is not like that. PJM was like that a little bit, but there's been about 400 megawatt hours of storage put in there, so that's flattened out. Why? No market.
Hi, I also have a question about the intersection of material science and software. Since batteries sort of, are in that space. So what do you see in the next year, 2, 3 years, 5 years of, the chemistry changing? There's a lot of new technologies and a lot of, research that's coming out about that, and then how software can also solve the problems that you're in today, having demand management and other things like that. You can kind of, I have come from a bunch of nerds, and I invited a bunch of nerds here tonight, so hopefully you can touch on that. Thank you.
Before it's been 10 years of doing Geli. I've been a consulting company for a couple years, but 10 years before that, chemical engineering developed battery technology. And I love solid-state batteries. I have a number of patents around that. We were going to start a solid-state battery company instead of starting Geli, but figured that was going to take a little bit more time. This was more important. So we think solid-state batteries are definitely coming. We're not sure with flow batteries as they go ahead. As lithium-ion keeps on getting cheaper, flow batteries are still in an interesting space. Solid polymer batteries is an interesting one called ionic materials. If anyone's watched the Nova special called Search for the Super Battery, it's a really interesting one, so there's a lot of materials there. And one of my favorites is there's a company called Titan Energy Systems, and they're doing a sonic BMS. Have you ever seen that thing where you can bounce a AA battery and you tell how charged it is by how much it drops, right? Well, basically you pound sonar into a battery pack and you can figure out from the modulus really fast, faster than a lot, more accurate than traditional BMSs. So there's yeah.
I have zero patents on but I think actually something that's actually really interesting you touched on is thermal storage. There's a lot of really interesting mechanical storage out there, flywheels. There's a project where I think a loaded train is being driven up a mountain in California using excess solar and wind, and in times of grid distress, they just drive that thing down. So there's some pretty cool stuff going on there.
And from STEM, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys doing anything that is looking at sort of degradation over time and managing that? I mean, there's a lot to do with sort of extending the battery application itself, even though through its lifetime, even though the ceiling may change over time. How can we not send that to the landfill? It's kind of one of the things that I want to pull out of this discussion.
Smart software.
Exactly right. And then you guys are pros in that. So.
But yeah, no, we are looking at degradation. I mean, some of our systems actually are getting to be several years old, and we're starting to track how they're performing and look at the number of cycles and energy throughput and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll add to that from the Tesla perspective. Even though energy storage is a slightly newer portion of the company, I know that we do look at it as a great application for extending the useful life of batteries, because the demands on an energy storage system can be moderated as necessary based on the life where the battery is in its lifespan. So that's definitely something that is factored into the control algorithms.
And thanks for asking that question. I spent a lot of time working on that specifically, and it turns out that, have you heard this thing where they say sitting's the new smoking? Yep. Yeah, have you heard that before? Well, now high SOC, high state of charge, is the new sitting. Right? Actually, having your battery full degrades it just as bad as having it warm. Right? I was a postdoc at the Naval Research Laboratory and got a unique opportunity to work with the Central Intelligence Agency, and they may or may not have a battery manufacturing facility that may or may not make 20-year lithium-ion batteries back in 2001. Why? Because you don't risk an agent's life to change a battery. How do you do it? Really good sealing techniques, really good electronics, don't use the whole battery. It's not about depth, it's about depth of discharge, but also about height of charge, too. So from a thermodynamic point of view, if you think about a discharge curve and where your voltage kind of doesn't change, that's the reversible region. We kind of built Geli just so we can actually operate batteries in the reversible region. And you get a non-linear extension of lifetime when you don't burn the candle at both ends.
Are we all at risk now because we just heard that?
20 years ago.
So I think Puneeth mentioned about carbon emissions. So there's a program called Self-Generation Incentive Program for battery installation in residential and commercials. So you would expect so the purpose of battery storage is one of the purposes is peak shaving. So you would also expect the GHG emissions control. But I think there was a recent study which found out that that was not the case. The GHG emissions were not going down that much. So how do we ensure that while saving customers money, we also bring down the GHG emissions?
Yeah, good question. I think it's policy, it's tariff, structuring the tariff and type of use rates, right? Properly. If you go back to that duck curve and you look at when there's a lot of solar and renewables and low carbon energy on the grid, you might want to not have that be the peak time where we're reducing further the demands, right? You want to soak up that kind of cheaper energy. And so there's some interesting rates being proposed, I think in Southern California, where they're moving the peak, which is typically in the middle of the day, when that was maybe 10 years ago when there was a lot of demand on the grid, to kind of those shoulder periods. And so that gives incentive for the battery to then be active during their shoulder periods and provide stability and do some, reduce the GHG emissions as a result.
Thanks. Maybe one or two more.
I've got a good wrap-up question.
Okay.
What keeps you guys up at night? And I'm particularly talking to the Tesla guy and the Geli guy, because you seem way too relaxed to be dealing with the world's largest machine, which is the electrical grid. And so what I mean by that is, are there any black swans out there that you think about that maybe most of us should also think about? Like, are we going to run out of lithium, or cyber terrorism, or EMPs, or anything like that? Crazy regulations, like no more solar panels on residential roofs. What bothers you?
Cybersecurity, definitely. And this might be unique to Tesla, and I hope he's not watching, but whatever Mr. Musk decides to tweet and then make us do something, he'll have a new project that we all get to hear about through Twitter. But realistically, more seriously, definitely cybersecurity is something that is a hot topic very regularly in our organization.
My 2-year-old, someone else who I won't name who tweets often. But I mean, this might sound kind of corny, but I mean, there are some really cool problems, that in this field. It's new, and there's, well, I wouldn't say that there's definitely not greenfield research. There's some definitely cool problems to solve that I want to stay up all night thinking about it, but I still stay up a little late sometimes.
What's that Geli guy? What bothers you?
Training installers to efficiently install these systems is a big education, training that workforce. There's a flexibility and scalability problem too, because everyone's house is different, everyone's building's different, everyone's got different stuff connected into it. So we need to have that flexibility. So I get concerned about that, but we built a product for that. And then scaling, there's 5 million commercial buildings in the United States. How are we going to install all of those in time? So scaling, flexibility, and then I would say also I'm a little more relaxed right now just because I see where the prices have been. When we started this company, I was buying batteries at $2,000 a kilowatt hour. We knew that as soon as it gets below $300 a kilowatt hour, we're in there. And solar's going too. So it's it's not end game. It's still a lot of work, but I'm a little more relaxed because I see the pathway. We're not, there's not as many of those things. I mean, I remember George Bush Sr. put a geothermal heat pump at his ranch in Texas. Why? It was cheaper. I learned that when I was in college. I was like, oh my gosh, as long as the technology is cheaper, it will go in, and then we just need the business to do it. So I think that's why.
Great answer, thank you.
If I could add one thing, I think you said cybersecurity. I think that's not thought of enough. I think in the utility world, and if we do, I think if we're all in companies successful, everyone in the storage business is always successful, we will end up being a critical part of it. And making cybersecurity, and I'm on the data science team, I don't think of it as much. I know VP of software is here, he thinks about it a lot more. But cybersecurity is huge for these systems, which are critical pieces of infrastructure, are secure.
And the last thing, I want to give so I'm from PG&E, I'm an electrical engineer, I'm a power system engineer. And so there's the analogy to the battery management system is the distributed energy resource management system. So at DERMS, that hasn't came up. So that's kind of, maybe it's because you guys are kind of behind the meter. So what the utilities are looking at is how do you manage this kind of fleet of, DERs, whether it's wind, solar, and storage. And there kind of needs to be, I think, a layer of trust. We saw kind of the forecast for the kind of the peak shaving from STEM, and so the utility really needs to have transparency into what's kind of behind the meter if they're going to be able to use those resources or even send price signals. So another thing came up was like markets and kind of policy. And so if the markets are in place to kind of incentivize the utility to send price signals and have the kind of markets do the heavy lifting that the algorithms can lay on top of, I think is something that needs to happen, and it will happen eventually. It just kind of takes a lot of time to get things through standards or in regulations. Another thing was like communications from the utility down to these systems is not really in place right now because the utility doesn't have that much visibility into the edge of the system, which is kind of a problem. It's a big problem, and that's why I think utilities are hesitant to accept a ton of renewable resources and solar, and you see that pushback. Pico is a really interesting place because of the high penetration of solar.
Jeff, we're going to get kicked out. So
okay.
Do you have a question for them?
So the question was like, are you guys working on more of the what's your interface with the utility for some of those algorithms that maybe are are you taking it up the stream to the grid level, I guess, or are you looking at that?
This is actually a really important question, and Geli's part of a Department of Energy RVE nodes project to figure out how not just do closed aggregators, but open aggregators too. And I think fundamentally there's going to be layers of aggregators, so you have to make sure that the aggregation is really fast and low cost, right? And then, since these systems are going to be kind of optimizing themselves, they do have to have some intelligence, from our companies that they can broadcast out availability to you, but really more in an aggregated way, because I think, as we were touching on before, with security, all of a sudden you're going to have millions of security holes into your private control system, right? On a private intranet, not internet, like where all these public devices are. And so that communication between the aggregation platforms on the public internet and the aggregation platform inside of your energy management system, which now has DERMS, is really important, and that's the process that a lot of people are going through right now. The thing is, like as you mentioned, if you have smart meter AMI data, I think DNVGL just published a report saying like it's not fast enough to help operators. So what do you do? Where's your low? So again, we need low voltage, medium voltage.
Right. This data was that was a key point. That's a huge point,
critical
right?
point.
That's a lot of money too,
you
right?
can't rate base it. I know, but I'll pay for it.
You guys have.
I'll add really quickly to that. Just I don't know if it will help in answering your question at all, but a related lesson that we've learned in Tesla is we've been building software platforms for control of aggregated battery systems, residential battery systems, and we've been quickly learning that there is no monolithic utility need. There are some utilities that are very happy to, typically smaller utilities, are very happy to use web-based interfaces for some of the command and control. There's others that want everything to be well integrated with their existing SCADA systems. And so we've ended up needing to build multiple interfaces to our aggregation platform. And that's also more attack vectors, which is in part why cybersecurity does stay top of mind.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I saw about 6 or 7 more hands go up as you were answering the last question. So we still have 12 minutes before they want us out of here. So we can probably push that out to at least 20. But let's start to move out back into the foyer. Please bring your plates and dishes out. And thank you all. And please come check out the meetup to see for next month's meetup. Thank you again.
And also, I found a bar nearby. If you guys would like to continue networking, High Dive Bar, Pier 28, or drunk.
Yeah. We did a great thing. I mean, it's the future, right? I think more sustainable, you need all the